So this morning I read the news. In fact, it was last night, and then this morning I read the news, and there are some developments going on in the Middle East. And a whole lot of people are very, very happy. Think this is wonderful. They think it's great. We'll go over it, go over the news first, and then I'm going to do a little bit of analysis. We're going to get started with Jerusalem Post. Article says Israel, UAE reach historic peace deal. We can make a wonderful future. Third ever peace treaty between Israel and an Arab state includes embassies, direct flights, agreements, suspends annexation, but Netanyahu says, I will never give up our right to our land. And as I pointed out so many times, that Benjamin Netanyahu, at every turn, he has always blocked sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. Israel and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, agreed to full normalizations of relations in a phone call with U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday, marking the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab country in 25 years. Israel agreed to suspend its planned extension of sovereignty over parts of Judea and Samaria to facilitate relations with the UAE and potentially other Arab and Muslim countries. What? What was that? And potentially other Arab and Muslim countries? Well, we'll go straight to Twitter and we'll find out what that is. Amichai Stein on Twitter announces Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a statement. I thank Egypt, President al-Sisi, and the government of Oman and Bahrain for their support of the historic peace agreements between Israel and the UAE, which expands the peace circle and benefits the entire region. Turkey opposing normalization and peace despite already having an embassy in Tel Aviv. So Turkey has an embassy in Tel Aviv, yet they don't want the Arab countries to have an embassy or normalization relations with Israel. All right? In fact, Erdogan says Turkey is mulling closing the embassy in Abu Dhabi, withdrawing ambassador, and suspending diplomatic ties over Israel-UAE agreement. Why is that? Well, we all know, you should know by now, that Erdogan has designs on rebuilding the Ottoman Empire. And although the United Arab Emirates never was a part of the Ottoman Empire, all Muslim countries in those days were. Or nearly all of them, I should say. Now, looky here. Oman joins Bahrain and says, backs normalizations of ties between UAE and Israel. In fact, Amichai Stein says, Israeli official says that Bahrain is expected to be the next country who will establish diplomatic ties with Israel. U.S. officials to Palestinian media, Bahrain and Oman are expected to normalize ties with Israel in the near future. Another official tells me Bahrain is expected to establish ties within weeks or months. I'm getting word that around November, possibly. Now, I don't need this anymore. Look at, so we were here. All right. Let's go. The Debka file. Remember the old peace deal. The peace plan of the century. Remember that? Israel was to get 30% of Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley. Now, Trump says annexation won't happen at all, or sovereignty won't happen at all. U.S. President Donald Trump Friday contradicted Benjamin Netanyahu's assertion that sovereignty for Jewish populated areas of Judea and Samaria was only suspended for the sake of normal relations with UAE. The Prime Minister said it would only take place in coordination with Washington. Trump's version was different. He said Israel agreed not to annex parts of the, and as he says, West Bank. It is more than taking it off the table. He agreed not to do it. That was a very smart concession, he says. A lot of people think this is wonderful. How many times have I gone over the new covenant, what it means, and how Samaria was mentioned in Jeremiah 31, the new covenant chapter of the prophets. If Israel does not get Samaria, Israel does not get the new covenant. But if Israel does not get the new covenant, neither does any Christian in the world. And I'm being sarcastic here, folks. And the reason why I'm being sarcastic is because Christianity claims they're the ones, the Gentiles, as Gentiles, were given the new covenant. But as I have pointed out in many videos in the past, it is Israel who gets the new covenant. When you read Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 34, it is the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In other words, it cannot be just the Jews. It has to be all 12 tribes of Israel. That is the promise of the new covenant. It is after the fact. Where Jehovah says it is a light thing. Isaiah 49 verse 6. He said, it is a light thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the... Let's look at Strong's Concordance here. He says it's too small a thing, or he says it is a light thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the, or to keep guard over them. That was the original mission of the Messiah, Israel's Moshiach of Israel. I will also give you for a light to the Gentiles, that you may be my salvation unto the ends of the earth. Now, which means that to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to cause them all to return, not one be left behind, not even the mixed multitude. You see, folks, as I pointed out in the last video, how I have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, using facts, that the former Anabaptists, Amish, Mennonite, and Hutterite are, at the very least, the mixed multitude of Israel. And if the mixed multitude was taken out of Egypt and given rest just like the rest of Israel was, how much more is going to be the second exodus of mixed multitude joining up with Israel, leaving Egypt. Light for the Gentiles, that you be my salvation unto the end of the earth. But this right here, raise up the tribes of Jacob and cause them to return and to watch over and keep them. That's what the mission of the Messiah was. Nowhere can you find this in the Christian creed. And this is the reason why Christian nations sell Israel out, or sell the Jews out, over and over and over and over again, for the sake of an elusive concept they call peace. Now, all the while, this is going on. All the while. This is France steps up military presence in Mediterranean as tensions rise between Greece and Turkey. France is stepping up its military presence in eastern Mediterranean as a standoff escalates between Greece and Turkey over oil and gas and exploration in disputed waters. It's you can read the article for yourself, but have a look at this article. Uh-oh. Now, as the nations, including the United States, are selling Israel down the river for an elusive concept called peace, do you honestly think that the world would actually come to Israel's aid if Turkey takes out its indignation, its newfound indignation upon Israel? The world cannot be trusted with the new covenant. The Christian world cannot be trusted with the new covenant. How in the world can you trust the Christians when it comes to the safety of the people of Israel? You can't. Israel takes Greece's side in maritime standoff with Turkey. Jerusalem kept mostly silent in the crisis building up in the recent months. Israel voiced its support for Greece and their dispute with Turkey over economic zones in the eastern Mediterranean. The foreign ministry released a rare declaration or a declarative statement that Israel follows closely as tensions arise in the eastern Mediterranean. Israel expresses its full support and solidarity with Greece in its maritime zones and its right to delimit its EEZ, exclusive economic zone, the ministry stated. All right. So it says right here, the situation in the eastern Mediterranean will be on top of the agenda for this meeting between Foreign Minister of Israel and the Foreign Minister of Greece. The message came as Turkey sent naval ships into the eastern Mediterranean this week, saying they are meant to protect a research mission surveying the continental shelf. The ships are in Greece's EEZ zone. So, as you can see, what Turkey is trying to do is start a war with Greece. It's very obvious. But they don't want to shoot first. They want Greece to shoot first. And of course, Turkey claimed control of the area during the terms of an agreement that was signed in Libya in November 2019, dividing large swaths of the eastern Mediterranean Sea between the two, creating friction between Ankara and Athens. Last week, Greece and Egypt signed their own agreement, delineating that their EEZs in the eastern Mediterranean to Turkey's consternation. So Israel has taken sides. You see. All the while, there's going to be peace agreements signed between the Arabs and the Israelis. Once again, at Israel's expense. Once again, at the expense of the Holy Land. Once again, at the expense of the new covenant. As we'll read here in Jeremiah 31. For those of you who are not familiar with the terms of the new covenant, 31. There will come a day. It's not at the same time. It says there will come a time. Says, not the Lord, Jehovah. Jehovah is the Creator. He is the Father of us all. He is Ab. He will be the Elohim of all the clans of Israel, and they shall be my people. Once again, Jeremiah 31 is the New Covenant chapter. Jehovah says the people, the survivors of the sword, will find grace in the wilderness of Israel. They will walk and rest. They will walk, or they will go back to their land, and then they will have rest. Incidentally, that is the real meaning of the Sabbath, folks. Sunday rejects the Sabbath entirely and replaces Israel with the Gentiles. But the Sabbath is a looking forward to a rest for the people of Israel from their persecution. Jehovah appeared far away. It's kind of like the story of the lost son. And when the son was afar off, his father ran to him, you see. And he loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, and favor, I will draw you back, or bring you back, cause you to return. I will build you again, and you shall be built. O Virgin of Israel, you shall be adorned with your tabrets, and you shall go forth in dances of them that make merry. You shall yet plant vines. You will again plant vines upon the mountains of Samaria. But Donald Trump says, no, you won't. Jehovah the Father says, yes, you will. Who wins? So, Samaria is not given to Israel so that there may be peace. And the planters shall plant, and they shall eat. All right? The planters are going to plant on the mountains of Samaria, and they will eat those plants, and they will eat the fruit of those plants. There will be a day when the watchmen of Mount Ephraim shall cry out and say, let us go to Zion, unto Jehovah our Elohim. Thus saith Jehovah, sing with gladness for Jacob, and shout among the head of the nations of the Goi. Publish, praise, and say, Jehovah will save his people, the remnant of Israel, the survivors of Israel. Why is that not being published today? Why is that not being announced today? Well, I'm announcing it. Why do I feel alone in this endeavor? How can this be? Behold, I will bring them from the north and gather them from the coastlands of the earth. What coastlands? The coastlands of the Mediterranean Sea. From the north, from the coastlands of the Mediterranean Sea. And other places it says, in Deuteronomy 30, Moshe says, and if any of them are scattered to the farthest places of the horizon, he's going to bring them back from there. All right? The blind and the lame, the woman with child and her that travails with child, together. See, this time the blind and the lame won't be thrown in the ovens anymore. The gas chambers. Not this time. And her that travails with child together. Great. Does it say tiny to you? A small remnant? Wrong. A great company. Let's look at this word, gadol. Bigger. Exceedingly. Extreme. A huge company. You see. They shall return. They shall come with weeping, with supplication. I will lead them and cause them to walk by the rivers of waters in a straight way, in a right way, wherein they shall not stumble. Because he is Ab. He is the Father of Israel. And Ephraim is my firstborn. Firstborn as in when Jacob set Ephraim and Manasseh on his knees and crossed his hands and made Ephraim get the greater blessing. Hear the word of Jehovah, you Gentiles, you Goy. You better listen. You better stop this nonsense declaring peace on the back of the new covenant at the expense of the new covenant. You better stop it. And declare it to the coastlands far off and say, he that scatters Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd does his flock. So I will announce today that in spite of President Donald Trump, the United States, Great Britain, all the nations around Europe, in spite of the Arabs, in spite of the Iranians, in spite of the Russians, and in spite of the Chinese, the Turks, here is the announcement from Jehovah in the scripture as you see them right now. Listen to the word of Jehovah, you Gentiles, and declare it to the coastlands far away and say, so this is my announcement today. He that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd does his flock. And he will redeem Jacob and ransom him from the hand of he that was stronger. If it means the destruction of Western civilization, he'll do it. Nothing is going to stand in his way. Nothing. Now, let's look way down here. Verse 15, thus saith Jehovah, a voice in Ramah, or Ramah, the height, lamentation, bitter weeping, Rachel, weeping for her children, refused to be comforted for her children because they were not. Thus saith Jehovah, refrain from weeping, and your eyes from tears, because your work will be rewarded, saith Jehovah, and they shall come again from the land of the enemy. So, here's the question. All right? The United States claims to be Israel's greatest friend, yet the majority of Jews in Israel, lost Israel, live in the United States. Where do they live? In the land of the enemy. Where do the Jews who still live in Italy, still live in Russia, still live in France, still live in Germany, still live in all these countries around the world? What are those lands? The enemy. Thus, and there is hope in your end, saith Jehovah, and your children will come again back to their own territory, their own boundary, whether the enemy likes it or not. So the enemy now is saying that Israel has dropped sovereignty of Samaria altogether. Well, I have news for you, President Donald Trump. You're a liar. Because applying sovereignty to Judea and Samaria is etched in stone, the stone of the new covenant, right here in Jeremiah 31. Verse 23 says, Jehovah of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, shall use this speech in the land of Judah and in the cities thereof, when I shall bring again their captivity. Jehovah, bless, it says, comely and habitation of justice and mountain of holiness. And there shall dwell in Judah itself all the cities thereof together, husbandmen, all the cities. That includes those cities that are in Judea and Samaria. Samaria belonged to the northern tribes of Israel, and Judea belonged to Judah. Upon this I was awakened, and I looked, I saw, and my sleep was sweet. Behold, the days come, saith Jehovah, I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Well, he's going to sow the land of the house of Judah and the house of Israel with the seed of men and with the seed of beasts. And it will come to pass that I will have, as I have watched over them to pluck them up and break down and throw down and destroy and to afflict, so will I watch over them to build and to plant, saith Jehovah. In those days they shall no more say, the fathers have eaten a sour grape and the children's teeth are set on edge. No, that doesn't apply to you Christians, you Gentiles. No, this applies to Israel. But everyone shall die in his own iniquity. Every man who eats a sour grape, his teeth shall be set on edge. Now we have this pesky new covenant. I say pesky because this is how the Gentiles treat the new covenant, as a pesky fly that gets in the way of their peace deals. But your peace deals will be destroyed. They are absolutely worthless, and the new covenant will remain forever. Behold, the days come, saith Jehovah, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. So it's not just with the Jews, but with all lost Israel scattered far and wide, even those of Israel deemed to be Gentiles. Because you see, when you read the book of Jeremiah and when you read the book of Hosea, the lost 10 tribes were indeed made Gentiles, no longer having Israel's name upon them. But the new covenant changes all that. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, which covenant they broke, even though I was a husband unto them, saith Jehovah. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with just the house of Judah? No, with the whole house of Israel, all 12 tribes. After those days, saith Jehovah, I will put my Torah in their inward parts, write it in their hearts, and will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And they shall no more teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know Jehovah, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith Jehovah. And what is this guarantee? The greatest guarantee that will ever be recorded in history forever and ever is this: I will forgive their iniquity, that's Israel and Judah, and I will remember their sins no more. And Paul, the only apostle to the Gentiles, guarantees that the new covenant he spoke of, that Yehoshua spoke of, is the new covenant of Jeremiah 31. Remember, the new covenant chapter, they are again going to plant on the mountains of Samaria. The term Judea did not exist in those days because Judea belonged in those days to Judah. This was talking about the other tribes of Israel, the ones that were rejected, the ones that were cast out. New covenant, folks. We'll go to Hebrews 8. Verse 7, for if that covenant, first covenant had been faultless, there would be no need for a second one. And where was the fault? The fault was with Israel. For finding fault with them, he said, Behold, the days come, saith not the Lord. And of course, the Greeks, they didn't accept the name of Jehovah, you see. Neither did the Romans. As you plainly see in Jeremiah 31, it's Jehovah. Thus saith Jehovah, I will make a new covenant with the church and the church. Is that what it says? This is Paul speaking. He's speaking to the Hebrews, reminding them of this thing. But for with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. He's saying the exact same thing that's written in Jeremiah 31. So in other words, everything in Jeremiah 31 applies today. Because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith Jehovah. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith Jehovah. I will put my Torah in their mind and write them in their heart, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall no longer teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know Jehovah, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. And what is the greatest covenant? What is the greatest historical peace agreement that will ever be made? For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. Paul says it again. Romans 11 and verse 25, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits. Who's he talking? Who's he accusing of them of being wise in their own conceits? You Romans. Roman Christians. That blindness in part has happened to Israel until the time of the Gentiles come to the full. And when he means come to the full, he means as in an hourglass. In today's language, we will say, when the time of the Gentiles come to an end. Yes, the time of the Gentiles will come to an end. And that means after those days, means after the time of the Gentiles comes to an end. And what will happen then? And so all Israel shall be saved. And I tell you something, folks, right now. My dad and I had been gone from the group to group, telling them these things about how all Israel shall be saved. And at one particular point, we were met with a threat of violence. And this group, they were not a Sunday keeping group, because we did not, my dad and I do not, never, since I was a year old, never had any fellowship with a Sunday group, ever. It was from a Sabbatarian group. Threats of violence. But that doesn't, the threats of violence doesn't change anything. Indeed, all Israel shall be saved, because it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away unholiness from Jacob. Now, right here in verse 27, Paul picks out, once again, the new covenant, as written in Jeremiah 31, verse 34. Because this is my covenant with them when I shall take away their sins. Why? Well, to the Romans, concerning the gospel, they might be enemies for the Romans' sakes, but when it comes to being the elect, they are beloved for the patriarchs' sakes. The patriarchs being Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why? Because the gifts to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob cannot be changed. That's why. It can't be changed. That's what it says right here. The gifts and the calling of Jehovah cannot be changed. So the Gentiles, on nearly a daily basis, are trampling on the new covenant for peace. Well, Paul has something to say about this. 1 Thessalonians 5. Verse 1, but of the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write to you, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of Jehovah's wrath, as written in Joel 2, Joel 3, Isaiah 24, so comes as a thief in the night, for when they shall say peace and safety. Well, it looks like in the next few months there's going to be a whole lot of peace and safety going on. Then sudden destruction comes upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Psalm 69, I believe it's verse 22, says, let their table be made a snare, and let peace and safety be the tripline. That's what it says. All the while, one of the players of the Gog-Magog war is threatening the East Mediterranean. You think nothing is going to happen, you do so at your own peril.